The gentle morning breeze swept through the tree-lined streets of Charlotte's Dilworth neighborhood as Madison Sullivan, known to everyone as Maddie, walked down her front porch steps. At 17, she carried herself with a quiet grace that belied the challenges life had dealt her. Her honey blonde hair caught the early summer sunlight as she bent down to scratch behind the ears of Billy, her faithful golden retriever, who had been by her side for the past 3 years. The modest 2-story house behind her held 17 years of memories, most of them happy, despite the conspicuous absence of a father she had never known. The wraparound porch, with its weathered swing and countless potted plants, was her mother Sarah's pride and joy. Sarah Sullivan had transformed their small piece of Charlotte into a haven of peace and beauty on a postal worker's salary, proving that love and dedication could make up for what they lacked in material wealth. As Maddie watched her mother hurry down the sidewalk in her crisp postal service uniform, a familiar warmth spread through her chest. Sarah's dedication to her job at Charlotte's main post office had never wavered in all these years, and neither had her devotion to her daughter. Their morning routine was as reliable as the sunrise. Sarah would leave for work at 7 sharp, but not before making sure Maddie had everything she needed for the day. "Don't forget your appointment with Mrs. Henderson after school," Sarah called out, adjusting her mailbag. "And honey, there's lasagna in the fridge for dinner." Maddie smiled and waved, watching her mother's retreating figure until she disappeared around the corner. The relationship they shared was more than just mother and daughter. They were best friends, confidants, and each other's strongest support system. They had built their life together brick by brick, just the two of them, and it was more than enough. The peaceful morning was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass from next door, followed by a string of colorful expletives. Maddie's shoulders tensed instinctively. Her Aunt Patricia, or Patty as she insisted on being called, was awake and presumably already drinking. The woman's descent into alcoholism had been a source of constant worry for both Maddie and her mother, but lately things had gotten worse. "Robert, you're an angel!" Maddie heard her aunt slur from somewhere behind her. She turned to see Mr. Mitchell, their elderly neighbor, carefully sweeping up the remains of what appeared to be a wine bottle from Aunt Patty's front steps. His kind face was creased with concern, but his eyes lit up when he spotted Maddie. Robert Mitchell had been their neighbor for as long as Maddie could remember, and over the years, he had become the grandfather she never had. It was he who had given her Billy 3 years ago, claiming that every teenager needed a loyal friend to grow up with. The dog had been a tiny, clumsy puppy then, but he had grown into a magnificent companion who seemed to understand Maddie better than most humans did. "Good morning, Maddie," Mr. Mitchell called out, his southern accent warm and familiar. "Heading to school? Want me to keep an eye on our friend here?" He gestured discreetly toward Patty, who had thankfully retreated back into her house. "Thanks, Mr. Mitchell," Maddie replied, grateful for his constant support. "I think Mum's planning to check on her during her lunch break today." As she walked to school with Billy trotting beside her, he would later make his way back home as he always did. Maddie couldn't help but reflect on the complex web of relationships that made up her life. Her mother's unwavering love, Mr. Mitchell's steadfast support, and even Aunt Patty's troubled presence, they all formed the tapestry of her world in Charlotte's historic Dilworth neighborhood. The morning air was thick with the promise of another humid Carolina day, but Maddie didn't mind. She had grown up with these sultry summers, and they felt like home. As she passed the grand old houses with their manicured lawns and century-old oak trees, she felt a deep connection to this place, to this life she and her mother had built together. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that her familiar world was about to change in ways she could never have imagined. The comfortable routine she had known all her life was standing on the edge of a precipice, and soon, everything would be different. But for now, on this peaceful morning in Charlotte, Maddie Sullivan was simply a 17-year-old girl, walking to school with her dog, carrying her mother's love like a shield against whatever the world might throw her way. Billy gave a soft woof and nudged her hand with his wet nose, as if sensing her contemplative mood. Maddie scratched his ears again and quickened her pace. The school bell would ring soon, and she had promised her English teacher she would come in early to discuss her latest essay. As she walked, the morning sun continued to climb higher in the Carolina sky, casting long shadows through the trees and painting everything in shades of gold and green. Life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and she was grateful for it. She had her mother's love, Mr. Mitchell's kindness, Billy's devotion, and a future full of possibilities stretching out before her. Even with Aunt Patty's occasional disruptions, Maddie felt blessed in her own way. She couldn't have known then that this ordinary morning was the last of its kind, that soon her world would shift on its axis, testing her strength in ways she never imagined possible. The first signs of trouble came so subtly that Maddie almost missed them. It was the little things at first. Her mother taking longer breaks at work, the unusual paleness of her complexion, the way she would sometimes pause mid-sentence as if catching her breath. But Sarah Sullivan was nothing if not stoic, and she dismissed every concerned inquiry with a warm smile and a change of subject. It was a balmy evening in late August when reality finally forced its way into their carefully maintained world. Maddie had just finished setting the table for dinner, the familiar scent of her mother's signature meatloaf filling their small kitchen. Sarah had come home early from work that day, another unusual occurrence that Maddie had tried not to worry about, and was sitting at their worn kitchen table, her postal uniform still on, her face uncharacteristically serious. "Sweetheart," Sarah began, her voice carrying a weight Maddie had never heard before. "We need to talk." The world seemed to slow down as her mother spoke, each word falling like a heavy stone into the still pond of their lives. The doctors had found something. Tests had been done. Results had come back. The medical terminology washed over Maddie like a wave, but certain words stood out with terrible clarity. Aggressive, advanced, options limited. Billy, sensing the tension, pressed himself against Maddie's legs, his warm presence anchoring her as the kitchen began to spin. Mr. Mitchell, who had come over to fix their leaky faucet earlier that day, was still there, his weathered hands gripping the back of a kitchen chair so tightly, his knuckles had gone white. "But there are treatments," Maddie heard herself say, her voice sounding distant and strange to her own ears. "There must be treatments." Sarah reached across the table and took her daughter's hand, her grip firm despite everything. "Of course there are, baby. And we're going to fight this with everything we've got. Dr. Thompson at Charlotte Medical Center is one of the best in the state, and she's already working on a treatment plan." The next few weeks passed in a blur of hospital visits, medical consultations, and insurance paperwork. Sarah approached her illness with the same determined efficiency she brought to everything else in her life, but Maddie could see the toll it was taking. Her mother's postal route was shortened, then suspended entirely. The carefully tended plants on their porch began to wilt as Sarah's energy focused entirely on treatment. Through it all, their small community rallied around them. Mr. Mitchell was there almost daily, bringing casseroles, walking Billy when Maddie needed to stay at the hospital, and simply being a steady presence when words failed. Even Aunt Patty seemed to pull herself together, staying sober for longer stretches and helping with household chores in her own erratic way. But it was during one of Patty's inevitable relapses that things took another turn. Maddie had come home from school to find her aunt in a state of drunken distress, waving papers she claimed gave her partial ownership of the house, some long-forgotten arrangement from when the sisters had inherited the property from their parents. "Your mother can't take care of this place anymore," Patty had slurred, her words cutting deep despite their drunken delivery. "Someone needs to think about the future." The future. It was becoming an increasingly frightening concept. Maddie tried to focus on her senior year of high school, on college applications, on the normal progression of life, but everything felt hollow in the shadow of her mother's illness. Billy became her constant companion, sleeping at the foot of her bed, following her from room to room, his brown eyes full of understanding beyond human capacity. One particularly difficult evening, after a long day at the hospital, Maddie sat on their porch swing with Billy's head in her lap, watching the sunset paint the Charlotte skyline in shades of pink and gold. Mr. Mitchell came over, settling into the rocking chair that had become his unofficial spot. "You know," he said, his voice gentle, "your mother is the strongest person I've ever known, and you, Maddie Sullivan, are cut from the same cloth." Maddie wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him, because as the autumn leaves began to turn and her mother's condition continued to deteriorate, she was beginning to understand that strength might be the only thing she had left to hold on to. What she didn't realize then was that this was just the beginning of her journey, that life had more challenges in store but also unexpected blessings, that sometimes the darkest moments could lead to the brightest dawns. But for now she sat on her porch in the gathering dusk, her faithful dog by her side, watching the sun set on the world as she had known it, and trying to find the courage to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The crisp November air carried the scent of fallen leaves as Maddie made her way through uptown Charlotte. 3 months had passed since her mother's diagnosis, and life had settled into a new, albeit precarious, routine. Sarah's determination remained unwavering, even as the treatments took their toll, and Maddie had learned to balance her senior year studies with helping at home and regular hospital visits. That morning, however, was different. Maddie had received a call from Carson Matthews, a prestigious copy and print shop in the heart of Charlotte's financial district. They were looking for part-time help, and her application had caught their attention. The possibility of contributing to the mounting medical bills had pushed her to apply, despite her mother's insistence that she focus solely on school. Billy wasn't with her this time. Dogs weren't allowed in the business district, and Maddie felt his absence keenly as she navigated the busy streets. The towering glass buildings reflected the morning sun, creating a maze of light and shadow that made her feel small and somewhat lost among the rush of suited professionals hurrying to their offices. The interview was scheduled for 9:30 a.m., and Maddie had left home early to ensure she wouldn't be late. She'd dressed in her best outfit, a navy blue blazer borrowed from her mother's closet and a modest knee-length skirt, hoping to project a professionalism beyond her 17 years. Her resume tucked safely in her bag, she repeated the answers she'd practiced with Mr. Mitchell the night before. As she waited for the crosswalk signal at Trade and Tryon, Maddie's mind wandered to the morning's events. Her mother had been having a good day, managing to eat a full breakfast and even helping Maddie style her hair for the interview. Aunt Patty, in one of her increasingly rare sober moments, had actually wished her luck, though the slight tremor in her hands suggested the lucidity might not last long. The walk signal turned green, and Maddie stepped off the curb with purpose. Later, she would remember the screech of tires, the collective gasp of the crowd, and the peculiar way time seemed to slow down. The black SUV came out of nowhere, running the red light as its driver futilely attempted to hit the brakes. Maddie had just enough time to register the horror on the face of the woman behind the wheel before impact. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of color and sound. There was no pain, not at first, just a strange sensation of flying, followed by an even stranger feeling of disconnect as she watched the scene unfold as if from above. She saw herself lying on the crosswalk, saw the gathering crowd, heard the distant wail of sirens growing closer. "Don't move her!" someone was shouting. "Wait for the paramedics." A woman in an expensive suit, the driver, was kneeling beside her, mascara running down her face as she repeated, oh God," over and over. Maddie wanted to tell her it was okay, that accidents happen, but her voice wouldn't work. The world was growing fuzzy around the edges, and staying awake seemed like too much effort. The next few hours passed in fragments of consciousness. The ambulance ride was a blur of voices and medical terminology. The emergency room was a carousel of faces and questions. Through it all, one thought kept surfacing. Her mother couldn't know about this, not now, not when she needed all her strength to fight her own battle. When Maddie finally regained full consciousness, she was in a hospital room at Charlotte Medical Center, ironically the same hospital where her mother received treatments. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows through the window, and her first coherent thought was that she had missed the interview. The doctor's words took a moment to penetrate the fog in her mind. Temporary paralysis, swelling around the spinal cord, good chances of recovery with proper rehabilitation, but it was the word temporary that Maddie clung to, refusing to consider any other possibility. A knock at the door interrupted the doctor's explanation. A man in his early 40s stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of concern and something else, guilt perhaps. He introduced himself as Nathan Anderson, husband of the woman who had been driving the SUV. "My wife Rachel, she's devastated," he explained, his voice tight with emotion. "We want to help in any way we can. The medical bills, rehabilitation, whatever you need." Maddie looked at him for a long moment, taking in his expensive suit, his well-groomed appearance, the genuine distress in his eyes. In another life, this might have been a scene from one of those legal dramas her mother loved to watch, but all she could think about was how she would tell Sarah, how she would manage to be strong for both of them now. "Thank you," she managed to say, "but I just need to focus on getting better." Nathan Anderson nodded, leaving his business card on the bedside table before retreating. As the door closed behind him, Maddie stared at the ceiling, trying to process how dramatically her life had changed in the span of a single morning. Outside her window, the Charlotte skyline stood proud against the autumn sky, unchanged and indifferent to the small personal tragedies unfolding in its shadow. The news of Maddie's accident hit their small community like a thunderbolt. Mr. Mitchell was the first to arrive at the hospital, having been called by the emergency room staff who found his number in Maddie's phone. He took charge of the situation with quiet efficiency, breaking the news to Sarah as gently as possible and arranging for her to be transported from her treatment floor to Maddie's room. The reunion between mother and daughter was both heart-wrenching and healing. Sarah, despite her weakened state, somehow found the strength to be the pillar of support Maddie needed. She moved her scheduled treatments to coincide with Maddie's physical therapy sessions, turning their shared hospital time into what she called their healing adventures. Billy, who had been inconsolable at home, was eventually allowed to visit thanks to a sympathetic nurse who recognized the therapeutic value of pet companionship. The dog's presence brought a sense of normalcy to the sterile hospital environment, and his unwavering devotion became a source of comfort for both Sullivan women. It was during one of these visits that Mr. Mitchell made an offer that would change everything. He had been watching Maddie struggle with her exercises, noting how the hospital environment, while necessary, seemed to drain both mother and daughter. "You know," he said, settling into the chair beside Maddie's bed, "my house has that converted ground floor apartment I never use. It has its own entrance, bathroom, everything, and it's just sitting there, gathering dust." The implication was clear, and Maddie felt tears welling up in her eyes. The apartment he spoke of had originally been built for his late wife when her arthritis had made stairs difficult. Since her passing 5 years ago, it had remained empty, a testament to a love story that had spanned over 4 decades. "Mr. Mitchell," Sarah began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "Now, Sarah, you know Margaret would have wanted this. Both of you need a place to heal, and that apartment was built for exactly this kind of situation. Besides," he added with a twinkle in his eye, "Billy already spends half his time in my yard anyway." The arrangement proved to be a blessing beyond measure. The apartment was adapted for wheelchair access, making it perfect for Maddie's initial recovery period. More importantly, it provided a refuge from the chaos that had overtaken their own home, where Aunt Patty's drinking had escalated to concerning levels. Physical therapy was a grueling process, but Maddie attacked it with the same determination she had inherited from her mother. The doctors were optimistic, noting that the swelling was subsiding faster than expected. Still, progress was measured in tiny increments, a toe wiggling here, a slight knee bend there. Through it all, Mr. Mitchell became their anchor. He drove them to appointments, cooked meals that tempted even Sarah's treatment-suppressed appetite, and most importantly, provided the steady, caring presence they both desperately needed. His gentle humor and unflagging optimism became a crucial part of their daily routine. One evening, as Maddie sat in her wheelchair on Mr. Mitchell's back patio, watching Billy chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, she noticed a familiar car pulling into the driveway next door. Nathan Anderson stepped out, carrying what appeared to be a gift basket. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said, approaching the patio with careful steps. I wanted to check on you. Rachel and we've been thinking about you a lot." Maddie studied him in the fading light. There was something different about him now, a sadness that hadn't been there during his hospital visit. She later learned that Rachel had moved out 2 weeks after the accident, the guilt and strain proving too much for their already troubled marriage. "Would you like some tea?" Mr. Mitchell called from the doorway, ever the gracious host. "I just put the kettle on." What followed was an unexpected evening of conversation that felt both awkward and somehow necessary. Nathan spoke about his 5-year-old daughter, Sophie, who lived primarily with him now. He talked about his work as an architect, his love for the city, and his own struggles with life's unexpected turns. As she listened, Maddie felt something shift inside her. The anger and resentment she hadn't even realized she was harboring began to dissolve, replaced by a strange sense of connection to this man whose life had been upended in a different but equally profound way. Later that night, as Mr. Mitchell helped her get ready for bed, he said something that would stay with her. "Sometimes, Maddie, healing isn't just about getting your body to work right again. It's about letting your heart heal too. She pondered these words as she drifted off to sleep, Billy curled up beside her wheelchair, his steady breathing a lullaby of loyalty. Outside, the Charlotte night was alive with the sound of cicadas, their chorus a reminder that life, in all its complicated beauty, continued to move forward, one day at a time. Spring had arrived in Charlotte, painting the city in vibrant colors and fresh beginnings. 4 months had passed since Maddie's accident, and her progress in physical therapy was nothing short of remarkable. Though she still needed support to walk, she had graduated from the wheelchair to a walker, each step a small victory in her journey toward recovery. The ground-floor apartment at Mr. Mitchell's house had become a sanctuary of healing for both Maddie and Sarah. The garden outside their window, now bursting with early spring blooms, provided a peaceful backdrop for their daily routines. Sarah's treatments continued, and while the prognosis remained uncertain, she faced each day with unwavering grace and determination. It was during one of her therapy sessions at the rehabilitation center that Maddie's life took another unexpected turn. She was practicing her walking exercises in the parallel bars when a small whirlwind in the form of a 5-year-old girl burst into the room, her dark pigtails flying behind her. "Sophie!" Nathan Anderson's voice called out from the hallway. "You can't run in here, sweetheart." The little girl skidded to a stop, her brown eyes wide with curiosity as she watched Maddie carefully make her way along the bars. Nathan appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath, his tie askew. "I'm so sorry," he began, but Maddie found herself smiling. "It's okay," she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "Sometimes we all need to run free." Sophie, seemingly taking this as an invitation, moved closer to the parallel bars. "Are you learning to walk again?" she asked with the direct curiosity only children possess. "My daddy says you got hurt, like when I fell off my bike, but bigger." There was something about Sophie's innocent question that cut through months of built-up emotion. "Yes," Maddie replied. "I'm learning to walk again. And you know what? Every day it gets a little easier." That chance encounter marked the beginning of a new chapter. Sophie, it turned out, often accompanied her father to the rehabilitation center, where he volunteered with a support group for families affected by accidents. The little girl's presence brought an unexpected lightness to Maddie's therapy sessions, her natural enthusiasm and endless questions providing a welcome distraction from the physical challenges. Nathan, too, became a regular fixture in her recovery journey. He would often arrive early for his support group meetings, stopping by to chat while Sophie regaled Maddie with stories about school and her pet goldfish. There was something different about him now. The guilt that had initially clouded his eyes had been replaced by genuine warmth and concern. One particularly challenging day, when Maddie was struggling with a new exercise and feeling discouraged, Sophie appeared with a slightly crumpled drawing. It showed 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, and one small, all holding hands. "That's Daddy, and you, and me," Sophie explained proudly. "We're all walking together." The simple kindness of a child's drawing brought tears to Maddie's eyes. She looked up to find Nathan watching them, his expression soft and uncertain. In that moment, something shifted between them. A recognition of shared pain, yes, but also of possibility. Back at Mr. Mitchell's, Billy had taken to waiting by the window each afternoon, his tail wagging furiously whenever he spotted Sophie's bright backpack coming up the street. The dog had developed an instant bond with the little girl, his protective nature extending to include this new addition to their lives. Mr. Mitchell, ever observant, watched these developments with quiet satisfaction. Over evening tea, he would often share stories about how he and his wife Margaret had first met, tales of unexpected encounters and life's surprising turns. "You know," he said one evening, as they watched Sophie and Billy playing in the garden, "Margaret always said that the heart has its own timetable. You can't rush healing, but you can't stop it either." Sarah, who had been resting on the patio lounger, reached over to squeeze her daughter's hand. The gesture spoke volumes of understanding, of support, of permission to embrace whatever happiness life might offer. As spring deepened into early summer, Maddie found herself looking forward to her therapy sessions with an eagerness that had nothing to do with physical recovery. She noticed the way Nathan's eyes crinkled when he smiled, how gentle he was with Sophie, how he always seemed to know when she needed encouragement or when she just needed space. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, Nathan shared stories about his architectural projects, his dreams of designing spaces that could help people heal. Maddie talked about her own aspirations, put on hold but not forgotten, to study literature and perhaps become a teacher. One evening, as she practiced walking in the garden with Billy faithfully at her side, Maddie realized that her heart was healing in ways she hadn't expected. The pain of the accident was still there, as was the worry about her mother's health. But alongside these challenges, something new was growing, something that felt surprisingly like hope. The Charlotte summer arrived with its characteristic humidity, turning the city into a shimmer of heat waves and afternoon thunderstorms. Maddie's progress had continued steadily, and she now walked with only the assistance of a cane. Her physical therapist had called her recovery remarkable, but Maddie knew it wasn't just the exercises that had helped her heal. The growing closeness between Maddie, Nathan, and Sophie had become a source of quiet joy in their lives. Their regular meetings at the rehabilitation center had expanded to include weekend visits to the park, where Billy would bound alongside Sophie while Nathan and Maddie walked at a slower pace, their conversations flowing easily. However, their peaceful routine was disrupted one stormy afternoon when Aunt Patty showed up at Mr. Mitchell's house in a state of agitation. She had been served with eviction papers from her apartment, and her alcohol-fueled rage was directed at anyone within reach. "This is all your fault," she screamed at Maddie, who stood her ground with the help of her cane. "If you hadn't taken Sarah away, if you hadn't—" Mr. Mitchell stepped between them, his usually gentle demeanor replaced by stern authority. "That's enough, Patricia. You need help and we're going to get it for you." The confrontation might have escalated further if not for the timely arrival of Nathan, who had come to pick up Sophie's forgotten stuffed rabbit. Taking in the situation at a glance, he quickly called a rehabilitation center he knew through his volunteer work, one that specialized in addiction treatment. In the aftermath of Aunt Patty's departure to the treatment center, Maddie found herself dealing with conflicting emotions. Relief warred with guilt, worry with hope. It was Nathan who helped her process these feelings, drawing on his own experiences with Rachel's struggles. "Sometimes," he told her as they sat on Mr. Mitchell's porch swing, "the kindest thing we can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their actions. It's how they find their way back to themselves." Their relationship had been evolving slowly, carefully, both of them aware of the complexities involved. Nathan was 38 to Maddie's 17, and though their connection was deep, they maintained appropriate boundaries. He was a friend, a support, someone who understood loss and healing in a way few others could. Sarah, whose good days had become more frequent, watched these developments with a mother's careful eye. One afternoon, as she and Maddie sat in the garden while Sophie and Billy played nearby, she broached the subject. "You know, sweetheart," she said, her voice gentle, "life rarely follows the path we expect. Sometimes the detours lead us exactly where we need to be." Maddie understood what her mother wasn't saying, that she saw the growing attachment between her daughter and Nathan, that she trusted Maddie's judgment, that she wanted her to find happiness wherever it might appear. The summer days fell into a new pattern. Mornings were for therapy and recovery. Afternoons often included Sophie's vibrant presence, and evenings were spent in the peaceful company of Sarah and Mr. Mitchell. Nathan would sometimes join them for dinner, bringing architectural plans to share or books he thought Maddie might enjoy. It was during one of these evening gatherings that Sophie made an announcement that would change everything. "Daddy," she said, her voice serious as she looked up from her plate, "I asked my teacher what to call someone who's like a mum, but isn't your real mum yet, and she said there isn't a word for that, but I think we need one for Maddie." The table fell silent. Nathan's fork clattered against his plate, and Maddie felt her heart skip a beat. Sophie, oblivious to the impact of her words, continued eating her mac and cheese as if she hadn't just voiced something that had been growing unspoken between them all. Mr. Mitchell cleared his throat, his eyes twinkling. "Well," he said, "I suppose some things don't need words to be true." Later that night, as Maddie lay in bed with Billy curled up beside her, she thought about Sophie's innocent observation. The little girl had put into words something Maddie had been feeling but hadn't dared acknowledge, that somewhere along the way, their carefully maintained boundaries had begun to blur into something else, something that felt surprisingly like family. Outside, a summer storm was building, lightning illuminating the Charlotte skyline in brief, brilliant flashes. Maddie watched the light show, remembering how different her life had been just months ago. She had lost so much, faced so many challenges, and yet here she was, surrounded by more love than she had ever imagined possible. As autumn painted Charlotte in shades of gold and crimson, Maddie's life had settled into a new rhythm. Her recovery had progressed to the point where she now walked with only a slight limp, though her physical therapist insisted on maintaining regular sessions to prevent any regression. The therapy center had offered her a part-time position at their front desk, recognizing both her need for independence and her natural ability to connect with patients. Sarah's condition had stabilized, bringing a cautious optimism to their lives. Her doctors spoke of promising responses to treatment, and though everyone knew the road ahead was still uncertain, there was more hope than there had been in months. She had even begun working part-time at the post office again, handling light administrative duties that kept her connected to her beloved workplace without overtaxing her strength. One crisp October morning, as Maddie was organizing files at the therapy center's reception desk, she heard the now familiar sound of Sophie's excited chatter echoing down the hallway. The little girl burst into view, her school backpack bouncing, with Nathan following at a more sedate pace. "Maddie! Maddie!" Sophie called out, practically vibrating with excitement. "Guess what? I got the lead in the school play. I'm going to be the star." Maddie smiled, coming around the desk to give Sophie a hug. "That's wonderful. What's the play about?" "It's The Wizard of Oz," Nathan explained, his eyes warm as he watched his daughter's enthusiasm. "Sophie here is going to be Dorothy. And Billy can be Toto," Sophie declared, her face serious. "He's already the right color." The suggestion led to an impromptu planning session during Maddie's lunch break, with Sophie sketching out costume ideas while Nathan and Maddie exchanged amused glances over her head. It was moments like these that had become precious to Maddie, simple, joy-filled interactions that felt increasingly natural. Later that evening, as Maddie recounted the day's events to her mother and Mr. Mitchell over dinner in their shared garden, Sarah made an observation that caught everyone by surprise. "You know," she said, her voice thoughtful, "I don't think I've seen you this happy in a long time, sweetheart. You're glowing." Mr. Mitchell nodded in agreement, adding with his characteristic wisdom, "Sometimes the best healing happens when we're not looking for it." The truth of their words resonated with Maddie. The past year had brought challenges she never could have imagined, but it had also brought unexpected gifts. Her relationship with Nathan had evolved into something deep and meaningful, built on mutual respect and understanding. They had never rushed, never pushed boundaries inappropriately, allowing their connection to grow naturally alongside Sophie's abundant affection. The weeks leading up to Sophie's school play were filled with costume preparations and line rehearsals. Billy, true to his gentle nature, tolerantly wore the makeshift Toto costume Sophie had created, though he drew the line at the small basket she wanted him to sit in. On the night of the performance, Maddie sat between Sarah and Nathan in the school auditorium, her heart swelling with pride as Sophie delivered her lines with impressive confidence for a 5-year-old. Mr. Mitchell, who had become as much a grandfather to Sophie as he was to Maddie, recorded the entire show on his new tablet, beaming with pride. After the performance, as they all gathered in the school courtyard, Sophie ran to Maddie first, still in her Dorothy costume complete with ruby slippers. "Did you see me? Did you hear when I said there's no place like home? You were amazing," Maddie assured her, pulling her into a tight hug. "The best Dorothy ever." Nathan watched them together, something shifting in his expression. Later that night, as they walked through Mr. Mitchell's garden under a canopy of stars, he finally put words to what had been growing between them. "You know," he said softly, "Sophie was right that day when she said we needed a word for what you are to her, to us. You've become such an important part of our lives, Maddie. I know things aren't conventional, and there's still so much to consider, but I can't imagine our future without you in it." Maddie felt her heart skip a beat. They had been so careful, so respectful of boundaries, but the feelings had grown nonetheless. She thought about Sophie's innocent joy, Nathan's steady support, and how naturally they had all fit together despite the circumstances that brought them into each other's lives. "I can't imagine my future without you either," she replied honestly. "Both of you." The moment was interrupted by Billy's excited bark as he chased a rabbit through Mr. Mitchell's prized flower beds. The spell broken, they laughed together, the joy of the evening wrapping around them like a warm blanket. That night, as Maddie lay in bed reflecting on the evening, she realized that happiness had crept up on her when she least expected it. The path hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead, but she had found something precious, a chance at a different kind of happiness, one built on understanding, growth, and love that had developed naturally over time. The holiday season descended upon Charlotte, bringing with it a mix of joy and new challenges. The city sparkled with festive lights, and a rare December snow had transformed the landscape into a winter wonderland. But amid the celebration, life continued to test the strength of the bonds that had formed between the unlikely family. News came that Aunt Patty had completed her rehabilitation program and was requesting to return home. The announcement stirred up complex emotions for everyone involved. Maddie and Sarah had moved back to their house months ago, though they still spent considerable time at Mr. Mitchell's, especially during Sarah's harder days. "She's still family," Sarah reminded Maddie gently as they discussed the situation, "and she's trying to make changes." The decision was made to allow Patty to return, but with clear boundaries and conditions. She would need to continue attending support meetings and maintain her sobriety. Nathan, drawing from his experience with support groups, helped establish a structure that would give Patty the best chance at success while protecting the family's well-being. The first family dinner with Aunt Patty back home was tense but hopeful. Sophie, with her natural ability to ease difficult situations, had insisted on coming along with Nathan, bringing a homemade welcome back card that brought tears to Patty's eyes. "I'm sorry," Patty said quietly, looking at each person around the table. "I know those words aren't enough, but they're a start." As winter deepened, another challenge emerged. Sarah's doctors recommended a new treatment protocol that would require her to spend several weeks at a specialized facility in Durham. The prospect of being separated was daunting, but everyone rallied to make it work. Nathan and Mr. Mitchell coordinated their schedules to ensure Maddie could visit Sarah regularly. Sophie insisted on making a calendar to count down the days until Grandma Sarah would return, decorating each page with glitter and stickers. Even Aunt Patty stepped up, keeping the house in order and attending diligently to her recovery program. During one of their visits to Durham, as Sarah and Maddie sat in the facility's garden despite the winter chill, Sarah broached a subject they had both been avoiding. "You know," she said, watching her breath form clouds in the cold air, "when I first got sick, my biggest worry was leaving you alone. But now," she smiled, looking at her daughter with eyes full of love and understanding, "now I see that you've built something beautiful, something strong." Maddie squeezed her mother's hand, fighting back tears. "We built it together, Mom. All of us." The conversation stayed with Maddie as she drove back to Charlotte that evening, Nathan beside her in the passenger seat while Sophie slept in the back, Billy keeping faithful watch over her. The headlights cut through the darkness, and she thought about how far they had all come. Life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. She was no longer just the girl who had lost so much. She was someone who had gained an unexpected family, someone who had learned that love could grow in the most surprising places. Back in Charlotte, their routines adjusted to accommodate Sarah's temporary absence. Maddie split her time between work at the therapy center, visiting Durham, and helping Sophie with her schoolwork. Nathan's architectural firm had taken on a major project designing a new rehabilitation center, and he often shared his plans with Maddie, valuing her insight from both a patient's and employee's perspective. Mr. Mitchell remained their steady foundation, his house still serving as a gathering place for family dinners and quiet evenings. He had begun teaching Sophie how to tend to his beloved garden, passing on the knowledge his Margaret had shared with him years ago. One evening, as they all sat around Mr. Mitchell's dinner table, Nathan, Sophie, Billy, and even Aunt Patty, who had earned back their trust day by steady day, Maddie looked around and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their family might not look like what she had imagined growing up, but it was real and strong and beautiful in its own way. The challenges weren't over. Sarah's treatment was ongoing, Patty's recovery was a daily journey, and there were always new obstacles to face. But they faced them together now, each person contributing their own strength to the whole. As Sophie's voice filled the room with stories about her day at school, Maddie caught Nathan's eye across the table. His smile held understanding, love, and a promise of more days like this to come. Outside, the winter wind whistled through the trees, But inside, their unlikely family had created a warmth that no cold could touch. The arrival of spring in Charlotte brought with it a sense of renewal and possibility. Sarah had returned from Durham, her treatment showing promising results that filled everyone with cautious optimism. The doctors spoke of progress, using words like responding well and exceeding expectations that made hope feel a little more tangible. Maddie's 18th birthday arrived with the spring blooms, marked by a celebration that filled Mr. Mitchell's backyard with laughter and joy. Sophie had insisted on helping to decorate, resulting in an explosion of pink streamers and glitter that would probably take weeks to clean up completely. Billy proudly wore the party hat Sophie had carefully placed on his head, though his eyes suggested he was doing it purely out of love for the little girl. "I have something for you," Nathan said quietly, pulling Maddie aside as the party wound down. He led her to the garden bench where they had shared so many conversations over the past year. It's not exactly a traditional birthday gift. From his pocket, he produced a small wrapped package. Inside, Maddie found a key attached to a handcrafted leather keychain with her initials burned into it. "It's to our new house," he explained, his voice soft but certain. "The one I've been designing. I wanted you to be the first to see the final plans." He pulled out a roll of blueprints, spreading them carefully on the bench between them. The house he had designed was beautiful, a modern interpretation of a traditional Charlotte home with a wraparound porch that echoed the one from Maddie's childhood. But it was the details that brought tears to her eyes. A ground-floor suite for Sarah, complete with its own garden access. A spacious room for Sophie with a reading nook, an accessible design throughout that would accommodate Maddie's occasional need for support, and a special area for Billy, including a dog door to his own fenced play area. "Nathan," she breathed, taking in every carefully considered detail. "It's us," he finished simply. "All of us together, if that's what you want." The moment was interrupted by Sophie bounding over, her party dress covered in cake frosting. "Did you show her? Did you show her the special room for Billy? And my room with the star ceiling?" Nathan laughed, pulling his daughter onto his lap. "I was getting to that part, sweetheart. And there's a room for Grandma Sarah right next to the garden," Sophie continued excitedly. "And Mr. Mitchell can come over whenever he wants because there's a special gate in the fence between our yards." Maddie looked up sharply at Nathan, who smiled. The lot next to Mr. Mitchell's became available. It seemed like fate. The significance of this revelation washed over Maddie. All the pieces were falling into place, not just for her and Nathan, but for their entire extended family. Mr. Mitchell would remain close by. Sarah would have her independence while still being part of their daily lives, and they would all be together. Later that evening, as the party guests departed and the spring twilight settled over Charlotte, Maddie found herself sitting on the porch steps with her mother. Sarah had been quiet during Nathan's presentation of the house plans, but now she turned to her daughter with eyes full of love and understanding. "You know," Sarah said, wrapping an arm around Maddie's shoulders, "when you were little, I used to worry that I wasn't giving you enough, that you were missing out because it was just the two of us. But looking at you now, seeing the family you've helped create," she paused, emotion making her voice thick. "You've built something beautiful, sweetheart." Aunt Patty, who had remained sober throughout the celebration, joined them on the steps. Her presence was different now, calmer, more grounded. "She's right," she said quietly. "You've shown us all how to build something new from broken pieces." The three women sat together in comfortable silence, watching as Sophie chased fireflies in the gathering dusk, Billy faithfully at her heels. Nathan and Mr. Mitchell were discussing something by the garden gate, their gestures animated as they lightly talked about the new house's landscaping possibilities. The scene before her filled Maddie's heart with a profound sense of rightness. The path that had led here had been far from easy, marked by loss and pain and challenges that had seemed insurmountable at times. But sitting there, surrounded by the family she had found and built and chosen, she understood that every step had led exactly where she needed to be. The spring breeze carried the scent of Mr. Mitchell's blooming gardenias, and somewhere in the distance a church bell chimed the hour. Maddie closed her eyes, letting the peaceful moment wash over her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adjustments, new steps forward in their journey together. But for now, on this perfect spring evening, everything was exactly as it should be. The summer sun beat down on Charlotte as construction began on the new house. Nathan had overseen every detail of the project, ensuring that each element of his design was perfectly executed. Sophie had appointed herself the official supervisor, complete with a tiny hard hat that matched her father's. Maddie split her time between her work at the therapy center, helping Sarah settle back into a routine and watching their future home take shape. The foundation was laid, walls began to rise, and gradually, the blueprints she had fallen in love with on her birthday began to transform into reality. Mr. Mitchell took particular interest in the garden plans, sharing his expertise about which plants would thrive in each carefully designed space. His enthusiasm was infectious, and soon even Aunt Patty, who had never shown much interest in gardening, was offering suggestions about which flowers to plant. "Gardenias," she said one evening, as they all gathered on Mr. Mitchell's porch to escape the summer heat. "Like the ones Margaret used to grow, they always made everything feel more like home." The mention of Margaret brought a warm smile to Mr. Mitchell's face. "She would have loved all of this," he said, gesturing to their gathered family. "She always said a garden needs love to grow, and look at what's growing here." As summer progressed, Sarah's strength continued to improve. Her doctors were increasingly optimistic, though they maintained the importance of continued monitoring. She had resumed her part-time work at the post office, and her colleagues had organized a welcome back celebration that touched her deeply. One particularly memorable evening, as they all gathered to watch the sunset from the half-finished house, Sophie made an announcement that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I wrote a story for school," she declared, pulling a slightly crumpled paper from her backpack. "It's about my family. Want to hear it?" They gathered around as Sophie read her story, titled "My Big Happy Family." In her 5-year-old way, she had captured them all. Her daddy, who built houses, Maddie, who helped people learn to walk again, Grandma Sarah, who knew everything about mail, Mr. Mitchell, who grew the prettiest flowers, Aunt Patty, who was learning to smile more, and Billy, who protected them all. "And we all lived together," she concluded proudly, "not in the same house, but in the same heart." Nathan pulled his daughter into a tight hug, his eyes meeting Maddie's over Sophie's head. The love and gratitude in his expression said everything words couldn't. The construction continued through the summer, each day bringing them closer to their shared future. Maddie's slight limp had become barely noticeable, though she kept up with her exercises faithfully. Her work at the therapy center had evolved into a full-time position, and she had begun taking online college courses in psychology, inspired by her experiences to help others through their recovery journeys. Billy had appointed himself the official construction site guardian, taking his duties very seriously. He would inspect the progress each evening with Sophie by his side, both of them equally interested in every new development. His special area was one of the first parts of the yard to be completed, and he took to it immediately, especially the dog door that gave him free access to both his space and Mr. Mitchell's garden. As the house neared completion, they began planning the move in earnest. Sarah's suite was carefully designed to give her both independence and easy access to the family areas. The kitchen opened onto the wraparound porch, perfect for family dinners under the stars. Sophie's room, with its star-painted ceiling, was exactly as she had imagined it, and she spent hours planning exactly where each of her stuffed animals would live. The gate between their yard and Mr. Mitchell's was installed, a simple but beautiful design that Nathan had created specifically to complement both properties. It symbolized what they had all come to understand, that family wasn't about walls and boundaries, but about connections and open hearts. Aunt Patty, now over 6 months sober, had found a small apartment nearby and a part-time job at a local florist, inspired by her newfound interest in gardens. Her relationship with Sarah had begun to heal, the sisters slowly rebuilding their bond on a foundation of understanding and forgiveness. One evening, as they sat on the newly completed porch, Maddie looked around at her family, Nathan grilling dinner while chatting with Mr. Mitchell about landscape design, Sophie teaching Billy new tricks with endless patience, Sarah and Patty arranging flowers in vases for the housewarming party they were planning. The scene was so perfectly ordinary, and yet so extraordinarily precious. Nathan caught her eye and smiled, crossing the porch to sit beside her. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning against his shoulder as they watched the sun set over their new beginning. The autumn leaves were turning golden when moving day finally arrived. The new house stood proudly next to Mr. Mitchell's property, its wraparound porch already decorated with potted mums in warm fall colors. The morning air was crisp and clear, perfect for the busy day ahead. A small army of helpers had assembled to assist with the move. Nathan's colleagues from the architectural firm, Maddie's co-workers from the therapy center, and even some of Sarah's postal service friends had all volunteered their time. Billy supervised the proceedings from his strategic position on the front lawn, occasionally herding Sophie away from the movers when she got too close in her excitement. "Remember when we moved into our first house?" Sarah asked Maddie as they unpacked boxes in the kitchen. "You were so tiny, but you insisted on carrying your own little box of toys." Maddie smiled at the memory, watching through the window as Sophie did exactly the same thing, determinedly carrying a box of stuffed animals that was almost as big as she was. Nathan followed close behind, ready to catch either box or child if necessary. "Some things come full circle," Mr. Mitchell observed, appearing with a tray of lemonade for the workers. "But they come back richer, more complete." The day passed in a blur of activity. Furniture was arranged and rearranged, boxes were unpacked, and slowly the house began to feel like home. Sarah's suite came together beautifully, the morning sun streaming through her windows, just as Nathan had planned. The garden gate between the properties was christened when Billy bounded through it to help Mr. Mitchell inspect his flower beds. Aunt Patty arrived in the afternoon, bringing a housewarming gift, a collection of carefully potted herbs for the kitchen windowsill. Her hands were steady as she arranged them, her 9 months of sobriety evident in her clear eyes and calm demeanor. "These are from the shop," she explained, adjusting a pot of basil. "But I've been learning how to propagate them. Maybe we could start an herb garden together." The suggestion brought tears to Sarah's eyes. It had been so long since her sister had shown interest in creating rather than destroying. "I'd love that, Patty," she said softly. "We could put it right outside the kitchen." As evening approached, Nathan fired up the grill on the back porch for their first family dinner in the new house. Sophie had insisted on setting the table herself, proudly placing name cards at each setting, cards she had decorated with glitter and stickers naturally. Mr. Mitchell brought over his famous potato salad, and Sarah contributed her signature apple pie. Even Billy had a special place set for him near Sophie's chair, complete with a new food bowl that matched the kitchen decor. Before they began eating, Nathan cleared his throat, looking slightly nervous. "I know we said no speeches today," he began, "but I have something important to say." He reached for Maddie's hand under the table. "This house, it's more than just a building. It's a symbol of everything we've become together, everything we've built." He turned to Sophie, who was practically bouncing in her seat with barely contained excitement. "Remember how you said we needed a word for what Maddie is to us? Well, I think it's time we made that official." Maddie's heart skipped a beat as Nathan reached into his pocket, producing a small velvet box. The ring inside was simple but beautiful, a delicate band with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "I chose a pearl," he explained softly, "because like us, it's something beautiful that forms from life's challenges. Maddie Sullivan, will you marry me? Will you officially become part of our family?" The question was barely out of his mouth before Sophie launched herself at Maddie, almost knocking over her chair. "Say yes, say yes! Then you'll really be my mum." Tears streaming down her face, Maddie looked around at the family gathered at the table, her mother beaming with joy and healthy color in her cheeks, Mr. Mitchell, who had become the father she never had, Aunt Patty, finding her way back to the sister she had almost lost, Sophie, the daughter who had claimed her heart from day one, and Nathan, who had helped her build this beautiful new life from the ashes of their shared pain. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, of course, yes." Billy, caught up in the excitement, began barking joyfully, causing everyone to laugh through their tears. As Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger, Maddie felt the rightness of the moment settle into her bones. This was where she belonged. This was her family. The evening stretched on, full of laughter and stories and plans for the future. The autumn air grew chilly, but no one wanted to move inside, not wanting to break the magic of the moment. Mr. Mitchell brought out blankets, and they sat together on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. Sophie fell asleep in Maddie's lap, her little hand clutching the edge of Nathan's shirt. Billy lay at their feet, ever watchful, ever faithful. Sarah and Patty sat close together, their heads bent in quiet conversation, while Mr. Mitchell rocked gently in his chair, humming an old tune under his breath. Looking out over their new garden where tomorrow they would begin planting their shared dreams, Maddie felt a profound sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but every step had led her here to this perfect moment with these precious people. As the evening stars twinkled above Charlotte, she knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The spring wedding was everything they had dreamed of and more. The ceremony was held in Mr. Mitchell's garden, now connected to their own by the gate that had become a symbol of their united family. The flowers were in full bloom, filling the air with sweet fragrance as guests gathered under a canopy of white ribbons and twinkling lights. Sophie, radiant in her flower girl dress, took her duties very seriously, scattering rose petals with precise care down the makeshift aisle. Billy, sporting a bow tie that matched the wedding colors, walked beside her with equal dignity, though he occasionally paused to sniff the petals. Sarah, looking healthier and happier than she had in years, waited at the front with Nathan. Her recent medical reports had been overwhelmingly positive, and the joy of the day added an extra glow to her already bright smile. Beside her, Mr. Mitchell stood ready to walk Maddie down the aisle, his eyes already glistening with happy tears. Aunt Patty had helped arrange all the flowers, her newly honed skills from the flower shop turning the garden into an enchanted paradise. 1 year sober now, she stood tall and proud among the guests, her clear eyes and steady hands a testament to her ongoing recovery. When Maddie appeared at the garden gate, a collective breath was drawn. Her dress was simple but elegant, designed to allow her to move freely, despite the slight limp that remained as a reminder of her journey. But it was her smile that captivated everyone, radiant, confident, full of joy and promise. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. Sophie insisted on holding the rings, carefully carrying them on a small pillow she had decorated herself. When the minister asked who gave this woman to be married, Mr. Mitchell's voice rang out clear and strong. "Her family does." The reception that followed was a perfect blend of elegance and comfort. Tables were scattered throughout the connected gardens, creating intimate spaces for conversation and celebration. The cake, decorated with fresh flowers, stood proudly on the wraparound porch where so many of their important moments had taken place. As evening fell, tiny lights twinkled in the trees and soft music filled the air. Nathan and Maddie shared their first dance on the porch, their silhouettes framed by the glow of the setting sun. Sophie soon joined them, and then Sarah, and soon the entire family was swaying together under the stars. Later, as guests mingled and celebrated, Maddie found a quiet moment to sit on the porch steps, taking in the scene before her. Billy laid his head in her lap, his constant companionship a comfort even on this joyous day. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Sarah asked, settling beside her daughter. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," Maddie replied, watching as Sophie taught Mr. Mitchell a new dance move, while Nathan looked on, laughing. How different everything is from what we imagined, but how perfect it turned out to be. "Life has a way of surprising us," Sarah agreed, wrapping an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "Sometimes the hardest paths lead us to the most beautiful destinations." The evening continued with speeches and toasts, laughter and tears. Mr. Mitchell shared stories about watching their love story unfold in his garden. Aunt Patty spoke about redemption and second chances, her voice strong and clear. Sophie gave an impromptu performance of "Here Comes the Bride" that had everyone reaching for their tissues. As the celebration wound down, Nathan found Maddie by the garden gate, pulling her close under the starlit sky. "Happy?" he asked, just as he had so many times before. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. They stood together, watching their family. Sophie dozing in Sarah's lap, Billy standing guard nearby, Mr. Mitchell and Aunt Patty discussing plans for the summer garden, and all their friends and loved ones sharing in their joy. The Charlotte night was warm and full of promise. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new moments to treasure. But tonight, in this garden where so much of their story had unfolded, everything was perfect. Looking up at the stars, Maddie felt overwhelming gratitude for every step of her journey, even the painful ones that had led her here. She had learned that family wasn't just about blood or circumstance, but about the connections we choose to nurture and the love we choose to give. The evening breeze carried the scent of gardenias, Margaret's gardenias, now tended by all of them together. It was a reminder that love, like flowers, could bloom again and again, each time more beautiful than the last. As the last guests departed and the night wrapped around them like a gentle embrace, Maddie knew that this wasn't really an ending at all. It was simply another beginning, another chapter in their ongoing story of love, healing, and the family they had built together. Sophie's words from her school story rang true. They all lived together, not just in their connected homes but in their connected hearts. And in that unity, they had found something rare and precious, a love that had grown from life's challenges into something strong, enduring, and more beautiful than any of them could have imagined.